This is Gemara and Yevamos Daf Samuch Beis. The learning should bring an incredible solution of Zochaim Devar Tarmativ Bas Baruch Shalom Levizah Boytik Mateli Shimon Ben Chayav Mudas Basima Malka. They should all find the Ziva Hagud Bekarav. The learning should be a solution for Hashem shall use and afraid that Shema Matil down Sid Mechlas Cham Basiva Sar Blum Bas Melchaim Yeshua Ben Malka Shavigu Shirachana Liat Gittel Bas Chana Beseich Shar Chayli Yisrael. We're holding on the very bottom of Samach Aleph Amid Beis. 2 lines in the bottom. Middle of the discussing the chi of the obligation that every man has of a pru'ervu. What exactly is the obligation? We already learned in the Mishnah on machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel how many children one has to have, and today we're going to delve into this a bit deeper. Beis Shammai said Shnei Zacharim, and Beis Hillel said Zachar and Nekeva. And today we're going to deal with this at length. Yevamos Daf Samach Beis, in particular, is a very, very famous Daf Gemara, as here is really a lot of the sources for many of the modern day shailas, etc. But as always, let's try to focus on getting a nice, clear explanation of the simple pshat in the Gemara. So says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Ma'itai Mayu de Beis Shammai. Where does Beis Shammai get this, that one is obligated to have 2 male children? Explains the Gemara, Yalfina mi who's greater than Moshe Rabbeinu? And what do we see by Moshe Techseb and Moshe Gershom Veliezer? Just like Moshe had 2 children, so too, and Moshe, after having these 2 children, separated from his wife, as Rashi points out, 2 lines to the bottom. So too, that is the basic obligation, is to have 2 male children. Says Beis Hillel, no. Creation of the world, God created Adam and Chava, the first man and woman, and therefore that's the obligation. Asks the Gemara, now begins the game of ping pong. According to Beis Shammai, why does he not learn out from the creation of the world that there should be an obligation to have a man and a boy and a girl? Explains the Gemara, Ein done in Efsher, Mei Shei Efsher. You can't learn the possible from the impossible. And as the top Rashi points out, because if there were no other girls created and it was just Adam, a man created, it would be impossible to have children. And that's the reason why perhaps Hashem had to create a man and a girl. But not necessarily does that hone in on the obligation of each and every person, explains Beis Shammai. So what about Beis Hillel? Continues the Gemara, Beis Hillel, Nami Hillel Vumi Moshe. Why didn't Beis Hillel learn out from Moshe Rabbeinu that he had sons and then separated from his wife? Amr Lacha, explains Beis Hillel, Moshe Midaitehu David. Moshe Rabbeinu did not act because he was commanded to do such. Moshe Rabbeinu on his own decided to abstain after having 2 male sons. And now the Gemara explains the Tanya, a very, very famous Gemara we learned in a Raisa. 3 things Moshe Rabbeinu did on his own, and Hashem agreed with him. Number 1, Pirish Ben Isha, he separated from his wife. Number 2, Vishibras Aluchas, he broke the Luchas. And number 3, Haisav Yemechad, he added on 1 day before Matan Torah. And the Gemara explains all 3. Number 1, Pirish Ben Isha, my Darish, where Moshe Rabbeinu learned out that he should abstain from his wife. Explains Moshe. Ma Yisrael Shalai Dibrim Am Shechina Elef Isha. Hashem spoke to Klal Yisrael for 1 moment at Ma'amad Har Sinai, and yet v'kavalem zman, and Hashem set a set time when he's going to speak to Klal Yisrael, and still the Torah teaches us Amra Torah Tigshu El Isha, that no man was allowed to be with his wife prior to Ma'amad Har Sinai. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, Ani, I Shebiyuchad Lidvar B'chol Shavish, I could speak with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at each and every moment. V'lo Kavali Zman, there's no specific time that Hashem is going to speak to me. Alachas Kam V'Kama, certainly I should separate from my wife. V'Eskimo Dait L'das HaMakim, and Hashem was masking and you Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem tells Moshe to tell Klal Yisrael after Ma'amad Har Sinai, tell Klal Yisrael to go home to their tents, which we know the tent refers to the wife. But you, Moshe Rabbeinu, you stay with me, says Hashem. So you see that Moshe Rabbeinu learned out that he should not be with his wife, and Hashem was masking. Number 1. Number 2, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do? Shivers al-Luchais, he famously broke the Luchais. My dar Darish. Where did Moshe Rabbeinu learn to break the luchos? Amar Uma Pesach. When it comes to the Karban Pesach, Shu Achaz Mishisha Meyois V'Shalosh Esrei Mitzvahs Amra Sheisha Meyois. There's one of the big 613, and Amra Torah says that Torah Kol Ben Ichar Lo Yoyechabo. It's merely one of the 613 mitzvahs, and the Torah says no Ben Ichar, no estranged person, no mummer, no non-Jew is allowed to eat of the Karban Pesach. HaTorah Kula, then the entire Torah, when it is given, the Yisrael Mumarim, and the Yidden are acting as Mumarim, they're serving an idol, they're worshipping the Egel Azav. Halachas Kama, certainly they cannot receive the Torah, so you broke it. V'skimo daitla das amakim dechsev asher shibarta. Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, luchos asher shibarta, that you broke. Ve'omar Reish Lakish Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. Reish Lakish explains, what does this pasuk mean? Asher shibarta yashar koichach shibarta. Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu yashar koyach shkoyach. Thank you. You did the right thing that you brought the luchos. And the third item that Moshe Rabbeinu did on his own, that Hashem was masking to him, was Aisev Yamecha. He died together on one day to Maimer Har Sinai. My Darish, how did Moshe Rabbeinu do such? Says the Torah, that Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, tell the people that they should be kadosh, they should be sanctified today and tomorrow. And Moshe learned out Hayoim Kimachar. Today has to be like tomorrow. My Machar, just like tomorrow, Leila Imoy, the night preceded it. Afayoim, so too today, Leila Imoy, we need to have the night with it. But already the day had passed, the night had passed. They're standing by the day, and Hashem says, Moshe Rabbeinu, they should be kadosh today and tomorrow. Says Moshe, tomorrow has a night with it, but today doesn't. So what must it be? Shema Mina, says Moshe Rabbeinu. Trei Yomi Levar Me, and must be 2 days aside from today. V'eskimo daitel das hamakim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed with Moshe. His thinking was aligned to the thinking of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachal. Why? Because the Shechina did not rest on Har Sinai until Shabbos, which was the day after that Moshe Rabbeinu gave over, and that is when the Torah was given, of course, honing in, number one, on the incredible detail that man has the ability to determine the dates, the Yom Tovim, when Maimer Har Sinai itself was. And of course, the beautiful Siyata D'Shmaya to be able to learn such a Gemara during Sfira as we ourselves are preparing for Maimer Har Sinai. And we'll see in a few moments again another application of a beautiful Siyata D'Shmaya. Continues the Gemara. Tanya, we learned to the Bryce, and now we're going to get back into the Mishnah. Rav Nosson says Beishamai doesn't just hold two males like we started off with. He holds two males and two females. Beisel says one boy and one girl. Explains the Gemara. Amar Avuna, my time with Rav Nosson. Where did Rav Nosson get this? Where did Rav Nosson learn Malima to Beishamai that has to be two and two? It says in the Torah about says in the Torah, they continued. V'ataisif. And Adam was with Chava, and she gave birth as Cain, and it continues that Va'isiv Laledis, she continued to give birth as Achav, as Hevel. So the words as come to include Hevel v'Achaisai, Hevel and his twin sister Cain v'Achaisai. A bit of a perhaps unknown Gemara that it wasn't just Cain and Hevel; each one had a twin with them. Uksev, and it says in the Torah, Kishei Saloy Lakim Zera Acher Tachas Hevel Kiargu Cain. Hashem gave me another child in place of Hevel, for Cain has killed him. So once Hevel. So what do we see? We see that anything less than 2 and 2 is not enough, because Hashem was Maleh, Hashem was Shasli to fulfill the basic requirement, explains the Gemara. So what we see from here is the novel approach from Nosson. The Beishamai doesn't just hold, you need 2 boys, you need 2 boys and 2 girls, as we see from the twin sisters that were born to Cain and Hevel. Rabbanan, and according to Rabbanan, what does he learn? He just learns that Chava was just expressing Haida, a gratitude, appreciation to Hashem that she had another child, but not necessarily does this hone in on the basic obligation to have children. We have another rice, just one boy and girl. either a boy or girl. So it's a third way of learning the machlekes. Amar Rav, my time with Rav Nosson, leave it to Beis Hillel. Where did Rav Nosson get this thing that according to Beis Hillel it's either or? Shenemar Loisav Ro L'Shavas Yitzhara. The same pasuk that we mentioned yesterday that Hashem did not create the world for it to be empty. And He made it inhabited by having a child, irrelevant as to what it is. So that is how Rava learns up the machlekes. Says the Gemara on the last narrow line. Let's go into a little bit deeper into the mitzvah, into the chiyuv of Pururvu. Itmar says in a brisa, someone has children while they were a guy and and they become a ger. Rav Yechanan Amar Kayim Pururvu. Says Rav Yechanan, he has been Mekayim Pururvu, that he had children and he doesn't have to have more children. He did not be Mekayim the mitzvah. Explains the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kayim Pururvu Da'avalei. He has kids. Reish Lakish Amar Lo Kayim Pururvu. Why not? A famous statement, as we've seen many times, this Masechta Ger and his Gayer Kikatan Shalai Ladami. Because when you become a Ger, you're like a newborn baby. You're unrelated even to your own children. So it's true that you had children, but they're not considered yours because you're a newborn entity, and therefore, says Reish Lakish, you need to have more kids to fulfill the mitzvah. And explains the Gemara of Azlataymayu that both Reish Yochanan and Reish Lakish go according to their own reasonings. Deitmar is learned in a brisa. You don't have a bachar because you already had a child. You already had the first of the womb. You already had the original child. True, that child was born when you were a guy, but that's enough, says Rabbi Yochanan. Therefore, a new child will not be a bachar. No, a child that you have now is a din of a bachar. Why? Because Gersh is Gary Kaddish Dami, and therefore, because you're a newborn person, so who cares that you had children when you were a guy? The child born now is considered the bachar. So I suggest the Gemara, it's the same machlekes that we had over there, whether there's going to be a din of a bachar to this person that is megayer. Says the Gemara, no. Says the Gemara, usricha. And we need both cases. If we had only the original case, because over there you already fulfill the mitzvah, but they're not children of inheritance because you're not Jewish at this point. And if they only said the second case about the nachla, that's when Reish Lakish says his din only in the case of a nachla. That's when Reish Lakish says that the new child born is din of a bachar. But in the first case, maybe there he'll be admitting to Rav Yochanan. Says the Gemara Sricha, so we indeed have to list both cases. So they're not interdependent upon each other. Yes, they're similar machlekesim, Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, with regard to this person that is megayer, whether he's related to his original children. However, it is a necessity to write the case twice. Continues the Gemara, Esvei. Asking, so now we have a machlekes, Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, a basic machlekes, whether a ger that is megayer, was he mekuyam, did he fulfill the mitzvah of Puravu from the children he had when he was a ger? Rav Yochanan says yes, Reish Lakish says no. So Eisei Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, says the pasuk in Nach that at that time, Baradcha, Baladan, who was whom? The Ben Baladan, the son of Ladan Melech Bavel, the king of Bavel, sent. He sent the letters, he sent gifts to Chizkiyahu. And what do we see in this pasuk? We see that even though referred to Goyim, it says Baladan, Ben Baladan. We see that there's a concept of a child, even with Goyim. So I asked Rav Yochanan, seemingly a child born when one is a guy is considered his child. Answers Reish Lakish Amar Leib Yosan Akom Islay. You're right. Well, he's a guy. Islay Chiyas, it's considered your child. But Niskairu, less lechias. But after the Giyires, after the one is Megayer, now it's considered like he's the newborn person. Now he's unrelated to the original children. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav, for about 10 lines to the end of the Amid. First one of the line is Leu Chiyas. So Amar Rav, I call my everyone admit she'ein lo Chiyas. Everyone admits that a servant has no Chiyas. Evet Kenani. How do we see this from the Chsei, from Eliezer, Evan Avram? Stay here with the donkey. And for there we learn out a nation that is similar to the donkey, and therefore the Eved himself has a din of a chamar, and he does not have a yichos. There are no children considered. That's the statement of Rav. Almost we could call it a first cousin to the statement of Reish Lakish that says when you're Megayer, your previous children, when you were a Gayer, not yours. Similarly, an Eved is not considered related. Meisvei asked the Gemara on Rav, and Siva had 15 sons and 20 servants. So we see, with regard to Eved Kananim, they are considered the sons. Explains the Gemara, Amar Rav Achavar Yaakov Kfar ben Bakar. Kipar ben Bakar. Now, what does it mean in that pasuk? It just means as if it's a child. It doesn't mean that it's has the din of a child. The young bull, the son of the bull. Iachi asked the Gemara, Chanami. So it should be also Nami. So too in the original pasuk that we quoted of Brodcha Bladam ben Bladam, why don't we say the same thing? Explains the Gemara. Shani also Diachsinu Bishmayu. So over there, the Torah itself honed in on the lineage, on the that the fact that they're related, and tied them and list them after the name of their father. Whereas here in the case of Siva, the pasuk does not say the children's name, and therefore when it says Banim in the pasuk of Siva, it does not really mean that the Avadim have a din of an Eved. Viba Yesema says the Gemara. Secondary is Echsinu B'dochta. Says the Gemara. You know what the pshat is? The pshat is that psukim elsewhere say that the goyim indeed are tied after their parents. That the pasuk does say that the child and the grandchild and the father and the son do have a connection even by goyim. So what do we see? Lamar is saying we see that even with regard to goyim there is some sort of relationship. Now says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom. Let's get back to our original discussion. We just segued a little bit, discussing whether a ger has a din of relationship to his children, whether an Eved has a din of relationship. But now let's get back to our original sigya, the sigya in our Mishnah we began with, the din of Puravu. And now the Gemara is going to discuss, as the Gemara begins on 4 lines from the bottom, Itmar hayaloi banim umesu. What if one had those children, machlekes beishami beisilel, 2 boys, 2 girls, 1 boy, 1 girl, 1 boy or 1 girl. But what if you had them? But then the child, Rahman the son, was nifter. Were you mekayim the mitzvah or not? Explains the Gemara. Rav Huna Amar Kayim Puravu, Rav Yochanan Amar Lo Kayim Puravu. Rav Huna Amar Kayim. Why Misham de Rav Asi? Tamar Rav Asi Ein Ben David Bachi Yichle Kol Neshama Shabegov. Mashiach is not going to come until all the neshamas are literally come out of the gov. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Kirach Milafanai Ya'atoif. And therefore, says Rav Yehuna, you're mekayim the mitzvah because you're driving towards the purpose of the world to bring Mashiach. Rav Yochanan Amar, no, lo kayim puravu. Why not? Excuse me, Rav Yochanan Amar, lo kayim puravu. L'sheves yitzara binan. Because the whole objective is not necessarily just to get the souls out, to get the neshavos to reach Mashiach. Says Rav Yochanan, no, you need the world to be inhabited. L'sheves yitzara binan. And if the child is nifter, then it is not. So machlokes, Rav Huna says you're mekoyam. Rav Yochanan says not. So I asked the Gemara on Rav Yehuna, Meisvei, as we turn over to Zamach Beizim and Beis, B'nei Banim, Areihem Kibanim, says the Brisa. Grandchildren have the status of children. But what do we see from the Brisa? That there is a necessity to point out that grandchildren could take the place of children with regard to one's obligation. Obviously, if the child is nifter, he does not fulfill his obligation, and therefore, you need a grandchild to take the place. Says the Gemara, no. What that Brisa means is to complete the requisite number of children for the grandfather, but not necessarily is it teaching us if the child is nifter, but rather it's teaching us that if one only has one, then the grandchild can take the place of a second. Meisvei asked the Gemara further on Rav Huna. B'nei banim areim kibanim. The grandchildren are like children. Meisachan mehem. And this brisa says explicitly, if one of the children is nifter, Oishanim Sasris was found out that he cannot have children. Loikayim peruvu. Tiyofta de Rav Huna tiyofta. And of course, this brisa is an explicit question and a tiyofta. The other day we had a kasha, which we pointed out as an answer. Tiyofta means that's it. Rav Huna, you are done. You are wrong. The child is nifter achman l'tzan. What is not mekayim the mitzvah of Pru'ervu. Continues the Gemara, B'nei banim areim kibanim, 5 lines from the top. The grandchildren have the din of children. Explains the Gemara, Savar Abaya Lemeimer Abaya thought to say, Bra Libra, Ubrata Librata. A son can take the place of a son that was nifter. A daughter can take the place of a daughter that was nifter. Meaning a granddaughter and a grandson. V'kol shekainin certainly Bra Librata. A grandson can take the place of a daughter. Avol Brata Libra loy. But a granddaughter cannot take the place of a grandson. Omar le Rava says to Abaya, I don't understand. L'shavis yitzar Abaya. What do you need? You need the world to be inhabited. Va'ika. And even if a granddaughter is taking the place of a son, it is a nikiyum, it is a fulfillment of having the world inhabited. And therefore says Rava, it will even work to have a granddaughter take the place of a son. That is nifter. So says the Gemara, we have a machlokes Abaya and Rava. But the kulei alma mios, everyone agrees, trei mechad loy. Everyone agrees that 2 grandchildren from one child does not suffice. It has to be from 2 different children. Says the Gemara, why does it not work? The Rabbanan said to Rav Sheshes, take a wife and have children. And Rav Sheshes responded, B'ni berati b'ninenu. The sons of my daughter have the din of my sons. So we see from Rav Sheshes that he had one son with daughters from there, and that's going to be enough. So seemingly one child could have multiple children and fulfill the mitzvah. Explains the Gemara, no, it's not a teret. Halsam Rav Sheshes dechli kamatchile. Rav Sheshes was just pushing them off. Why? Rav Sheshes yakir mipirkei Rav Huna. Rav Sheshes was sterile. Rav Sheshes was unable, unfortunately, to have children anymore due to sitting through the shiurim of Rav Huna. And Rashi explains over here, Rav Huna's shiurim are very, very long, and they had to use the bathroom. And says the Gemara in Bechayros, and he didn't want to leave in the middle of the shiur, and it caused them to have Rachman l'San unable to have children. So Rav Sheshes was saying, I can't have kids, so at the very least, the children from my son will take their place. But it's true, it's not necessarily a raya to the real kiyam, the real mitzvah of Pru'ervu. Says the Gemara, so what is the source? Where do we know? We started off with a bryce on the top line, that b'nei banim hareim kibanim. Where do we know that from? So Amar le Rava bar Mari mina milsa dam rabbanim b'nei banim rei kibanim. Where do we know this from? If you're going to run it out from the pasuk that says, it says that Lavan says, the daughters are my daughters and the sons of my sons, and referring to the grandchildren. But says the Gemara, but if that's true, and you're learning out from there that grandchildren have a din of children, the psukim continue, and Lavan says, and the flock are my flock. Are you going to tell me also that the animals are his? But that's not true. Rather, Lavan is saying that what? The animals that you bought from me. So too over here, Lavan is saying to Yaakov, the children that you had, that you acquired from me. But not necessarily is this a raya, the grandchildren have a din of children that they're traced back to the grandfather in his fulfillment of the mitzvah of Pru'ervu. Says the Gemara, attempt number 2, what's the source that grandchildren have a din of children with regard to the obligation of having children, Pru'ervu? Says the pasuk, and after Chisaron went with the daughter of Machir, Avi Gilad's father, and she gave birth as Sigov, and she gave birth to Sigov. Uksav, and the psukim continue. Mini Machir yardu mechaykikim. From Machir came out mechaykikim, lawgivers. Now, Machir, we know, was from the Shevet of Menashe. Uksev, but yet the pasuk says, Yehuda mechaykiki. So even though we just said that the children were from Machir, and Machir is Menashe, but the pasuk calls these mechaykikim, these lawgivers, from Yehuda. But I thought they were from Menashe. So what do we see? It must be that we're considering tracing it back one generation earlier to Yehuda. So that's the raya that the grandchildren are traced back and have a din of the grandfather of Yehuda in this case and fulfilling of the mitzvah. So says the Gemara, that's going to be the source that b'nei banim harehem kebanim. Now we go back and we say that Masnisan delav kirav Yeshua. Our Mishnah that said that once one has children, he fulfills the mitzvah, now there's no longer a need to have children, says the Gemara that is not like Rabbi Yeshua. Why? Titania Rabbi Yeshua, and this is going to be a third sheet on the whole chiyuv of Peruvu. Nasa Adam Isha Bialdusa, Yasa Isha Biziknusa, says Rabbi Yeshua, even when you marry a woman when you're young, marry again when you're old. Haylabanim Bialdusa, you have children when you're young, Yalabanim Biziknusa, have children when you're old. Shenemar, and Yeshua learns this out from a pasuk of Baboiker in the morning, Zarazaracha. You should plant your seeds, Ulaarev, and the evening, Al Tinach Yodecha. Do not sit idle, don't hold back your hand, Kencha Yodea, because you don't know. You don't know what's going to have a kiyum. So says Rabbi Yeshua, says Rabbi Yeshua, the obligation of proof never ends. Because you never know, maybe a child, Rahman al-San, will be nifter, and says, if you're sure, you always have to be in the process of the ability of having children. So clearly our Mishnah that said, once you fulfill, and there's a number, one boy, one girl, two boys, two girls, etc., is not like Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Kiva Aimer, another way of learning this pasuk, Lama Taira Bialdusa refers to Taira. Learn Taira when you're young. Yom Taira Bizignusa, still learn Taira when you're old. Hayla Talmidim Bialdusa, you have Talmidim when you're young. Yellow Talmidim Zignusa, make sure you have Talmidim when you're old. Shanara is Amru Shnei Elef. This is the Raya. There were 12,000 peers of Talmidim Ha'ila Rabbi Akiva. We're middle of Sfira. Wonderful Siyat Shmai, as we mentioned. There were 12,000 Talmidim pairs that Rabbi Akiva had. Mikvas Ad Antifris. That filled up from a place called Mikvas Del Tifris V'Kula and Meisur Rachman L'San V'Perek Echad. That's what we have here nowadays. Mebnei Shlo Nagu Kavay Zelazeh V'Yoylem Shameim, and the world was desolate until what? Desolate of Torah. At Shabbat Rabbi Akiva, and this is the right that even when he got older, he has to continue having Talmidim. Eitzel Rabbi Sinu Shabbatarain V'Shinu Lahem Rameir Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yisi Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua V'Heim Amidu Torah, and they were the ones that held up the Torah at that time. So from here we see that even when one has Talmidim when they are young, they should continue having Talmidim when they are old. And we'll conclude the Gemara that says, Tanan, the first medium size line, Kulamesu Bezachar Atzeres, they all died from Pesach to Shavuos, Am Rav Chama bar Abba, Vitim Rav Chia bar Avin, Kulamesu Misara, terrible death. Maihi Am Rav Nachman Asachra, constriction, a lack of breathing and ability to talk, etc. And that is the raya that there's never an end to having children, to having Talmidim. And Amar Rav Masna, halachic Rav Yeshua, says Rav Masna, that is indeed the psak halacha. We paskin like Rav Yeshua, that one has to always have the ability, try to keep on having children to ensure that it lasts, and when he is nifter lachameir v'asrim, will ensure that he has children he's living over. We'll pick up from Rav Tanchana Amar Rav Chanilayim the next year in Mirza Hashem.